So today we are going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, which is chapter 15. Okay. So I'm happy that we were able to complete all the chapters. Um, and this will be the last chapter, which will be on your exam, you know. So let's go ahead. So we studied a lot about the nervous system. We were talking about the front line, whatever, the brain, the spinal cord. But there is a hidden system which we haven't mentioned much about, and that's the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is that system which works behind the scenes. Okay. So in a play, there is a lot of people who works behind the scenes. That is the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is actually a motor nervous system. So when I say motor, suddenly you will think about muscles. It moves your muscle. Yeah, that's what you think. Actually, this is controlling the muscles, but it's not the skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscles are the muscles which are voluntary. If you want to pick up something, you decide to move your hand and then your hand moves, you go and pick it up. Whereas in the autonomic nervous system, the muscles are the cardiac muscle, which you have no control, smooth muscles, which is in the digestive tract, in the lungs, you have no control, and also the glands. So this is where this motor system works mainly. Okay. Cardiac muscle is seen in the heart. Smooth muscle, we said, is in the digestive tract and also in the walls of the blood vessels. Why do blood vessels need muscles? To constrict, exactly. Why do you need constriction? To control the blood pressure. That's right. When the blood vessels constrict, the blood pressure goes up, and vice versa. When it dilates, the blood pressure goes down. So basically, there is a reason for it. Blood is flowing to all the organs, but the autonomic nervous system decides where should the blood go. Should it go to the digestive system? Should it go to the skin? Should it go to the brain? All this is decided by the autonomic nervous system. So it is actually controlling the internal organs or the viscera. Viscera means internal organs. So it carries out all the involuntary actions, which means it's independent of our will. And basically, it is contributing to homeostasis. And I told you, life is all about homeostasis, a constant internal environment. Okay. You don't want a lot of fluctuations. You don't want your body temperature going up, then we call it fever. You don't want your blood pressure shooting up. Everything should be within a range. So that is what this system is doing. For that, how does it do it? Through reflexes. We talked about reflexes, right? We said when you touch a hot object, you pull your hand back without you even thinking about it. That is a reflex. But this is another reflex called the visceral reflex. Okay? And that's how it controls it. So what is a visceral reflex? Exactly like a somatic reflex, where the reflex is unconscious, automatic, and it's stereotyped. It's the same reflex every single time. And it has all the same components which we described in a somatic reflex. There's a receptor. There are neurons which are afferent. Afferent means going towards the center. And there's an integrating center, the interneurons. We said there are integrating interneurons. And then there are efferent neurons, which means it takes the signal from the central command center or the integrating center, and then brings those impulses to the effector organs. So we have also the effector organs. I told you it's similar to the somatic reflex, but the receptors are called visceral receptors, and the effectors are called visceral effectors. So, as I told you earlier, it's different from the reflex that we studied earlier. It's a totally different type of reflex. Let me give you an example. So, blood pressure. High blood pressure is a very common problem in the United States. So, how does the blood pressure, how is it kept normal? So first, there are receptors. So where are the receptors? They are in the big arteries. This is the big artery coming out of the heart. This is called the aorta. And over here, you have an artery which is supplying the head and neck structures, the brain and all. This is called the carotid artery. Okay. In the carotid artery, you have some receptors. They are called stretch receptors. That means if the blood vessel has got a high pressure, if you have a high blood pressure, that vessel is going to stretch. When it stretches, the stretch receptors, which are situated in the big arteries, they are stimulated. Then afferent signals will go to this part of the brain. This is called the brainstem. We talked about the brainstem. The top part is called the midbrain. This part is called the pons, and this lower part is called the medulla oblongata. So it brings the impulses to the medulla. Okay. In the medulla, there are interneurons. And the interneurons will take a decision. The decision is sent through the afferent nerve, which is going to be the vagus nerve. Efferent nerve is going to be the glossopharyngeal nerve. And the efferent signals coming out is going to go to the effector organ, which is the heart. And it's going to tell the heart to slow down. So when the heart slows down, your blood pressure comes back to normal. Okay? So this is a negative feedback loop. Or we talked about positive feedback, we talked about negative feedback in the preliminary topics. This is a negative feedback. And it happens unconsciously. So that is an autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system has got two main divisions. One is called the sympathetic, and the other one is called the parasympathetic. Sympathetic means it's the fight and flight system, which means it prepares your body for a fight or a flight. When do you have those situations? When you're angry, right? When you're having a lot of fear, or when you have, after a heavy exercise, right? These are the times when the sympathetic activity will be more, which means your heart rate is going to increase. The heart contractions, the force of contraction is going to be stronger. Blood pressure is going to go up. What about the airway? Airway is going to open up because you need more oxygen now. More airflow into the lungs. What about the liver? Liver is going to release a lot of glucose into the system because you need energy, quick energy. And the autonomic nervous system has to now control the blood flow. It has to send more blood flow to these organs of importance, which is necessary now. This is not the time for that burrito which you were eating to be digested. You're in an emergency mode. Digestion can wait. Now you need blood flowing to the heart. You need blood flowing to the liver. All these things need a control, and that's what's going to happen. So more blood to the muscles, heart, to the liver, less blood flow to the digestive tract. Okay, so that's the sympathetic. What about the parasympathetic? Parasympathetic is exactly the opposite. It is rest and digest. So it calms the body, conserves the energy. You're not in an emergency situation. It's a very peaceful atmosphere. You're calm, composed. And that's the time when your digestion is going to be promoted. Also, waste elimination, urination, all those things are going to happen. So those are the two main divisions. So you should understand what is sympathetic, what is parasympathetic. And we're going to go into more details. We're going to look into how this system works. So does that mean sympathetic and parasympathetic are kind of independent? Is there one acting at one time, the other acting at another time? No. They always work together. Which means if they are working together, that means there's something called an autonomic tone, which means it's like a background hum all the time. Maybe in an emergency situation, the sympathetic will be more predominant. Parasympathetic will be less at that time. Whereas in a relaxed atmosphere, the opposite. Okay. So you need both because, if you don't have a sympathetic stimulation, your blood pressure is going to completely drop because all the blood vessels are going to be relaxed. Blood will be pooled. It will not be pumping. So you really need both systems to be active. So that is a baseline sympathetic activity all the time. And the same thing, parasympathetic is like the brake. Hey, go slow. So when in a normal situation, you have a baseline of both, and that's called the autonomic tone. Okay, clear? Right. So in summary, we said that the sympathetic excites the heart, but inhibits digestion and urination. Parasympathetic does the opposite. It slows the heart, but promotes digestion and urination. But the balance will keep shifting, okay, depending on the body's needs. Okay, clear so far? Good. Let's move into the pathway. Let's have a look. What is the pathway? What is the difference between a somatic pathway and an autonomic pathway? So in a somatic nervous system, what is the somatic nervous system controlling? The skeletal muscles, exactly, the voluntary muscles, okay? So it's controlling the voluntary muscle. And here's a diagram of the somatic nervous system. Here you can see, so this is actually coming out of the spinal cord. So this is a motor neuron coming out. And here you can, okay, this is the green one here. So you can see it's coming out here. And it goes right up to the muscle, and there is a synapse here, and this is the neuromuscular junction. So one synapse. So there is one muscle fiber all the way to the muscle or the effector organ. And this is a myelinated nerve fiber. Okay, so it's one single nerve. Whereas, now, let's look at the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, here is a diagram. You can see there are two fibers. One fiber comes up to here, and then from here, a second fiber starts. So there are two neurons before you reach the target organ. So we need two names. The first neuron, what do we call that? We're going to call that the preganglionic neuron, which means there's a ganglia here, and that ganglia is the sympathetic ganglia. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but this is a sympathetic ganglia, and in a ganglia, synapsis happens. So a synapsis has happened here, and from here, another neuron goes to the target organ. So we call the second neuron postganglionic neuron. Okay, and the difference is that one is myelinated, that's why it's green in color. The second one is unmyelinated, that's why it's red in color. Okay, and this is a parasympathetic or autonomic system. So the effector organs has to be what are the three effector organs in the the autonomic nervous system? Heart, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, the digestive tract muscle. Also, the smooth muscles are in the blood vessels. And the third is the glands. So three effector organs. So that's what I have emphasized here. Here you can see in the somatic nervous system, effector organ is the skeletal muscle, whereas in the autonomic nervous system, these three effector organs. Okay. So we said that the somatic nervous system has got only one synapse. One more thing now I'm going to add to that. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. One synapse, neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Autonomic nervous system, how many synapses? Two, exactly. At the first synapse, the neurotransmitter is again acetylcholine. But in the second synapse, there's a difference. In the second synapse, the neurotransmitter is Ne. Ne is norepinephrine. Okay, so that is the neurotransmitter there. So here, so we have the autonomic nervous system. We know this is the autonomic nervous system because there's a ganglion here, right? And there's a preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron. Same thing here. This is the autonomic nervous system. But now I'm going to show you the difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Okay? In the sympathetic, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter at the first synapse. And over here, in the parasympathetic, it's exactly the same. So no confusion. So here and here, it is acetylcholine. But over here, there is a difference. So let me just move this out of the way. Let me take this up. Okay. Over here, you can see that in the sympathetic, norepinephrine, Ne is the neurotransmitter. Whereas in the parasympathetic, again, it is acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is here, here, and here. But over here, you have norepinephrine. Okay. So that's the difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic regarding the neurotransmitter. Okay. Any confusion here? Yeah? Okay. Right. So these are the basics. So once you get your basics right, you'll be good. Okay. Now, let's move into, so we were looking at the ganglion and the nerve fiber and all. Let's look at the big picture. The sympathetic division is called the thoracolumbar. Thoraco means thoracic region, thoraco. Lumbar, lumbar, the lower back. Those are the vertebrae. So you have the cervical vertebrae, you have the thoracic vertebrae. What's the next one? Lumbar. What's the next one? Sacral. Correct. Yeah. So these are the vertebrae. So coming out of them, you have these fibers coming, nerve fibers coming out. So the sympathetic is actually coming from the middle part here. So it's coming from the thoracolumbar. That means T1 to T12 and two lumbar segment, L1 and L2. Okay, so you can remember thoracolumbar. So you can look at how the nerves are coming out. It's coming from the middle part, but when it comes out, you can see there's a ganglia here. So I said I will talk about the ganglia. This is called the sympathetic ganglia. It's like beads on a string, right? So if this is the vertebral column, on either side of the vertebral column, you can see the sympathetic ganglia. And if you look at the preganglionic fibers, which is coming out, going into the ganglia, what do you see here? This is very short, right? Whereas the postganglionic fibers are long. So you have short preganglionic fibers and long postganglionic fibers. Another thing is here, the preganglionic is myelinated, postganglionic is unmyelinated, which we said earlier, but I told you many things, so I don't expect you to remember at this point, but it'll slowly, you're going to start getting the hang of it. All right, so I said this is called the sympathetic chain. Synapse happens, postganglionic fibers leave, and they reach the target organs. And I told you the postganglionic fibers are long and unmyelinated. Okay. Neuronal divergence. What is neuronal divergence? So, in the sympathetic system, the preganglionic neuron talks to multiple postganglionic neurons. Okay? That results in a widespread activity. So when one neuron is talking to 10 neurons, then those 10 are going to talk to another 10. So there's going to be a huge amount of activity, which is what you want in an emergency situation. You want a all systems go situation. That's a widespread, coordinated fight or flight response. So this is a whole body response. That's in a sympathetic nervous system. And we talked about the ganglion, and from the ganglion, what comes out? The postganglionic fibers. Before the ganglion, you have the preganglionic fibers. So when a nerve fiber enters a ganglion, it has got three choices. The first choice is it can immediately synapse, and then the postganglionic fiber will go out. That's choice number one. Choice number two, it can travel up or down, and then it can synapse. It can synapse at a lower level or it can synapse at a higher level. That's option number 2. Now there's a third option. The third option is it can pass right through the ganglia without synapse. So it is going to go right across without synapse, but there are some collateral ganglia here. Because according to the definition, you have to have a ganglia. If it doesn't synapse here, it has to synapse somewhere. We said the autonomic has got a ganglia in between. So here, this is the ganglia where it's going to synapse. And this is called a collateral ganglia. So there are 3 collateral ganglias. There's a celiac ganglia, there's a superior mesenteric ganglia, and inferior mesenteric ganglia. These are the big blood vessels in the body. Superior mesenteric artery, inferior mesenteric artery, celiac artery or celiac trunk. The big blood vessels in the body. And from there, the postganglionic fibers come out and they supply the liver, they supply the stomach, the intestine, the bladder, the reproductive system, kidneys, all those things. So you can see, look at the distribution here, huge distribution. Now at this stage, I have to talk about one particular gland, which is called the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is a small gland. It is located on the top of the kidneys, like a little pyramid on top, like a cap. Let's say it's like a cap. Okay, so this is a kidney here, and this is the adrenal gland. Now this adrenal gland, it has got 2 parts. The outer part is always called the cortex. The inner part is called the medulla. The adrenal medulla, which is the inside, is actually a ganglion. It acts like a ganglion. So we call that, we say that this inside part of the adrenal gland is a modified sympathetic ganglia, which means if a preganglionic fiber comes here, so here you have a preganglionic fiber coming, it reaches here, and there's going to be it is going to stimulate the adrenal medulla here, but unfortunately there's no postganglionic fibers. So whatever neurotransmitter is produced there is not going to go into another neuron, but it is going to go into the blood. So when you have a chemical going into the blood, what do you call that chemical? Hormone. So it acts like a hormone. So the ways of communication, one is you have a nerve impulse coming from the brain, and the second way of communication is through hormones. So the glands produce the hormones move through the blood, reaches the target organ, and produces the effect. It's slow. Okay? So that is what happens in the adrenal medulla. It produces hormones, and what's the advantage of having a hormone produced? This is now the sympathetic system. That means this blood is going to reach many organs. So again, your output is going to reach many areas. So there is a widespread sympathetic stimulation, which is a fight or flight, and which is exactly what you need in an emergency situation. So we call this system sympathoadrenal system, because it is a sympathetic system, but it involves the adrenal gland, sympathoadrenal system, which means the sympathetic activity is happening through the nerves, but there is a hormonal activity also happening in the blood. So the reach is much bigger. So you have multiple systems which are recruited for that fight or flight response. Let's look at the parasympathetic. We were talking about the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is called the rest and digest. So it comes from the brain and it comes from the bottom, the sacral area. So this is called the craniosacral. So it's from the top and the bottom. Craniosacral. Cranial refers to the brain stem actually. And the brain stem has got three regions. We studied about that. What are they? Midbrain, pons, medulla. Those are the three parts of the brain stem. And the bottom part, which will be the sacral region. This is called the craniosacral. The other one was called the thoracolumbar, which is from the middle. This is from the top and the bottom. Okay. So, in the parasympathetic system, the big difference is that the preganglionic fibers are long. In the sympathetic, we said they are short, right? They are very short. The ganglions are next to the vertebrae. So it goes there, it synapses there. From there, there is a long postganglionic fiber which goes to the target organ. Whereas here, this is a big nerve which goes right from the point of exit. It keeps going, and before it reaches the target organ, there is a ganglia. So the ganglia is actually located close to the target organ. That means the preganglionic fiber is long. Postganglionic fiber is very short. So we have a long preganglionic fiber, which is myelinated, and we have a short postganglionic fiber, which is unmyelinated. Clear so far? Yeah. I'll be posting this on the internet. Okay, so you'll get it. Yeah. So which are the coming from the brainstem? There are cranial nerves coming out. Most of the cranial nerve comes from this region, from the brainstem. So there are four main cranial nerves which carry the parasympathetic impulses. One is the oculomotor nerve, which is cranial nerve number 3. What does oculomotor do? It controls the pupil of the eye. So why do you need the pupil? It controls the light entering into the eye. So if you have a bright light, the pupil will constrict. So it filters out the light that enters the eye. And when you're in a dark area, it dilates. So you can see well. So that's the role of the oculomotor nerve. And also there's one more thing. If you want to see an object close, or if you want to see an object away, the lens has to change the shape, right? If the lens is like this, which is more convex, you can see objects which are close. And if the lens is less convex, you can see or you can focus the objects which are away from you. So that is also controlled by the oculomotor nerve. Facial nerve. What does facial nerve control? You know it. Muscles of the face, muscles of facial expression. But it also controls the salivary glands. What does the salivary gland produce? Saliva. and the tear glands, which produces tears. So that's facial nerve. Glossopharyngeal nerve has got a specific function. It stimulates the major salivary gland of the body, which is a parotid gland. So the parotid gland is here, just below the ear, here, which I'm just following the parotid. It's here. It's a big gland, produces a huge amount of saliva, and glossopharyngeal nerve specifically stimulates the parotid. And then you have vagus nerve. Now, vagus nerve has got a very wide distribution. It supplies the heart, it supplies the lungs, it supplies the esophagus, it supplies the small intestine, liver, and kidneys. So it's got a very wide distribution. That is a vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering. So it's like a nerve which has got a very extensive distribution. So we were talking about the cranial part. What's the parasympathetic called? Craniosacral. We talked about the cranial part. Now let's talk about the sacral part. So the sacral part comes from S2 to S4, and it forms the splanchnic nerves. This is a nerve that supplies the large intestine, rectum, urinary bladder, and the reproductive organs. Now here, let's look at the neuronal divergence. We said the neuronal divergence is how many neurons does this neuron talk to? That is the neuronal divergence. In the parasympathetic, the preganglionic neurons talk to only a few postganglionic neurons. So that means there is less neuronal divergence. What about the sympathetic? The neuronal divergence is much more because it talks to a lot of other neurons. And in the sympathetic, it's fight or flight. You want to have a huge impact. The whole body should be alert because you're in an emergency situation. Here, you're in a relaxed situation, right? Parasympathetic is rest and relaxation. You don't need a full body activity. So here, the neuronal divergence is very less. So that means the action is much more focused and specific. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about another nervous system in the brain. I'm sorry, in the gut. This is called the enteric nervous system, ENS. Okay. Now, the enteric nervous system is also called the second brain, or the brain in the gut, which means this is composed of 100 million neurons, and they are located in the walls of the digestive tract. 100 million. That's a big number. So it's not something you can take lightly. What does it do? It regulates the motility of your digestive tract. It regulates the acid secretion in the stomach and the gut. It manages the gut reflex. So the very reason why when you eat, your food is propelled through the digestive tract, what's the process called? Peristalsis. That means there is a contraction happening, and the area which is the food is pushed to the next area. When that expands, another contraction happens. Food is pushed forward. That means your food is moving. And there's a lot of things happening there. Food is being digested, a lot of things happening, but that movement. And you have digestive enzymes being produced, which means there is a sensory neuron there. That means there's an afferent neuron. There is a motor neuron, which is the efferent neuron, and there is an interneuron there. So this is the enteric nervous system, and that controls the motility of the gut. But the enteric nervous system is not by itself. It has got an oversight by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which means if the sympathetic activity is more, it's going to slow down the gut, because in sympathetic fight and flight, your gut has got no role in that. So if you have food in your stomach and if you're running from a bear, that food can wait. So blood is not going to go to the gut. It's going to the muscles. That's where you have to have the blood, because you're going to run. Whereas if it's a parasympathetic activity which is predominant, it will speed up the gut activity. So blood is going to be diverted to the gut. You need digestion. You're in a relaxed state. So digestion, excretion, all those things happen. Coming to Hirschsprung disease. This is a hereditary disease or a defect where the enteric nervous system is absent. Usually seen in children, in newborn. That means that part of the gut cannot propel food. That means it gets blocked. Food is blocked. The passage is not happening. It's not propelled. So what is the first poo of a baby called? Do you know that? There's a name for it. The first poo of a baby is called meconium.
That's also a type of diamond.
Meconium?
No.
Okay. So meconium is the first poo of a baby. And that the sign of Hirschsprung is that the baby does not pass poo. So there's no bowel movement, and that's when you start suspecting. That means the enteric nervous system is missing in some parts of the gut. And what happens is when it is missing, the gut gets dilated. So you can see here, there's no ganglion cells here. These are the ganglion, which I said was the interneurons, which is taking decisions. There's no interneurons in this area. So that means it gets dilated. There's no propulsion there. So that results in what is called a megacolon. So that is Hirschsprung's disease. Okay, so I'm going to just take a little stop here. Let's just pause for a second. Pause. All right. So coming back to our topic, the question here, which I'm going to answer, is why does sympathetic and parasympathetic have contrasting effects? We said one is activity, the other one is rest, right? Why is that happening? Any guess? One is, we said the neurotransmitters are different, right? But also, the neurotransmitter has to have a receptor. So they attach to a receptor, and the receptor will have some changes. And that's how the nerve, the nerve signal continues, right? The receptor is also different. So there are different neurotransmitter, different receptor. That's why. So the target cells have different receptors. Neurotransmitters, are different. We talked about it. So there are different keys and different locks. That's why the effects are different. What are the main neurotransmitters we talked about? Acetylcholine, yeah. What else? Norepinephrine. Those are the two we talked about. There's a lot more than that, but I'm just confining to a few. I'll talk a few more towards the end of the lecture, but these are the two main ones. And you know where they are secreted. We said preganglionic acetylcholine. In the parasympathetic, here also acetylcholine, but in the sympathetic, it is norepinephrine. So acetylcholine in 3 places, norepinephrine in the post-ganglionic sympathetic division. That's the only place where there is norepinephrine. Clear? Yep. Good. Let's move on. Okay, so what is a cholinergic nerve? So there are 2 types of nerve. There are adrenergic nerves, cholinergic nerves. A cholinergic nerve means it is a nerve that secretes acetylcholine. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. That's a cholinergic nerve. And what is a cholinergic receptor? You know it. When the receptor receives acetylcholine, we call it a cholinergic receptor. So there are 2 types of cholinergic receptors. There's a nicotinic receptor, and there's a muscarinic receptor. Nicotinic receptor is usually seen in the skeletal muscle, the neuromuscular junction, which is studied in the lab. That is a nicotinic receptor. And it is excitatory, which means the effect is going to cause some excitation. Whereas the muscarinic receptors, where is it seen? It's usually seen in the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands. In this area, the effect can be either excitation or inhibition. And we said it's a cholinergic receptor, so it accepts acetylcholine, right? So that is a cholinergic. So cholinergic, acetylcholine. That's the connection. Adrenergic means these are the nerves that secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. We talked about norepinephrine, right? Epinephrine is also part of the deal. Together they are called the catecholamines. So it could be epinephrine, norepinephrine. Both are kind of the same family. And the receptors are now called adrenergic receptors. So adrenergic nerves, adrenergic receptors. And here there are 2 types. There are alpha adrenergic and there are beta adrenergic. 2 types. So what is a neurotransmitter again? It could be either epi or norepi, right? And we talked about norepi, so let's stick to norepinephrine. Okay? So norepinephrine, when it binds to an alpha receptor, we said there are 2 types of receptors, the effect can be different than when it attaches to a beta receptor. So if any binds to a beta receptor on the heart rate is going to increase. When the heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. Whereas if the NE attaches to a beta receptor in the lungs, it dilates the air flow. It dilates the bronchioles. When the bronchioles are dilated, more air flows, which is what you want in an emergency situation. And it opens the airway. If any binds to alpha receptors in blood vessels, it causes vasoconstriction. So these are the kind of effects. So you have to understand that the effect depends on what type of neurotransmitter, what type of receptors, different types. And most of the drugs work by manipulating these things. So we said ANS controls the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. How does it control the gland? So there's a slight difference here. ANS controls blood flow to the gland. So when the autonomic nervous system causes dilatation, there's more blood flow and there's increased secretion. When ANS causes vasoconstriction, the blood supply to the gland is reduced, secretion is reduced. Okay, so that's how it controls the glands. Now, this is a topic which we haven't discussed, but I want you to take a guess. What do you think? Which system has got more long-lasting effect, sympathetic or parasympathetic? It's the opposite. It's sympathetic. Yeah. So sympathetic is going to last longer. Because it all depends on how the neurotransmitters are removed. So we said the neurotransmitter is what causes the effect. So if in case of the acetylcholine, there's an enzyme situated in the gap there. And that enzyme is removed by this. I'm sorry, the acetylcholine is removed by this enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. So it's like when the action is over, zoom, it's gone. So acetylcholine will not linger there for a long time. Whereas there's no enzyme that removes the norepinephrine. So if norepinephrine is released, it will linger for a longer time. That is why, and also I told you, norepinephrine can be released by nerves and also by that gland. Which gland would we talk about? Adrenal gland. So it secretes it into the blood. So the effects are longer. So that's why the sympathetic effects last much longer. Okay? Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. Dual innervation. So let's quickly talk about dual innervation. So usually we think that the sympathetic, parasympathetic, they're antagonistic. So, and it is true, they are antagonistic, but sometimes they can also be slightly different. They can be cooperative also. We'll talk about one classic example of antagonism. So parasympathetic, what does it do? Slows down, rest and digest. Sympathetic steps up. Look at one example, the pupil of the eye. So if controlling the size of the pupil, the parasympathetic will release, what is a neurotransmitter released by the parasympathetic? Acetylcholine. And that will cause the pupillary constrictor muscles to contract, which causes pupillary constriction. Whereas the sympathetic will release norepinephrine, which causes pupillary dilatation. So in an emergency situation, what you want is to have a good vision. You're going to run from a bear. You have to see where you're going. Your pupils have to be dilated. So that's what happens. So that's a classic example of antagonism. And I told you, sometimes it could be cooperative. The two effects can be kind of helping each other. For example, in a male sexual response, the parasympathetic is needed for causing erection, whereas the sympathetic stimulation is needed for ejaculation. So both are kind of complementary. It's not just one is needed, the other is not. No. Sometimes they can be cooperative. Even though it's difficult to understand, they're two opposing, they're enemies. But they can be also be working together in certain circumstances. Also, regarding saliva, parasympathetic produces a thin, watery saliva. Sympathetic produces a thick, mucus-rich saliva. Both are needed for digestion. So sometimes they can also be cooperative. But there are some organs which doesn't have this dual innervation. Dual means sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? Okay. That's one example is the blood vessel. Blood vessels only receive sympathetic innervation. And we said that the blood vessels regulate the blood pressure. How does it regulate? When there is an increased sympathetic stimulation, it causes constriction of the blood vessel. When the blood vessels are constricted, the blood pressure goes up. And when there's a decrease in sympathetic stimulation, the blood vessels are not constricted, they dilate, so the blood pressure goes down. It's like you imagine you're driving a car without a brake. All you have is an accelerator. So you go there, you want to go forward, you want to move forward, you keep using the accelerator. You want to stop, you take your legs off the accelerator. You don't have a brake. Does it make sense? Where is the control of the autonomic nervous system? Who is the main controller there? It is the brain. Well, actually, it is not the brainstem. It is a center above the brainstem. But brain has got some influence. How does brain influence the autonomic nervous system? Emotions. When you have emotions like anger, fear, your heart rate is increased. Emotions are in the brain, in the limbic system of the brain, right? But the main command center is the hypothalamus, which is located deep in the brain. And in the lab, you saw the hypothalamus, right? When you did the brain dissection? Yeah. So that's the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is the main command center. So it receives input from all the internal organs. Like it receives impulses of temperature, hunger, thirst, it also receives input from the higher brain centers, like the emotions. What it does is it integrates all these inputs and sends output. That regulates the heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, digestion, etc. Another thing, so you have the hypothalamus here, you have the brain on, the higher centers on top of that. And below the hypothalamus, you have the brainstem. You said the brainstem, yeah? Brainstem also has an influence. Brainstem takes commands from the hypothalamus, but they have some kind of autonomy. So they can control some reflexes independently. And also the spinal cord, which is further down. So you have the hypothalamus here, you have the brainstem here, and below the brainstem you have the spinal cord. So the spinal cord also has got some control of the basic reflexes, especially urination, defecation, all these things is controlled by the spinal cord. That's why in a spinal cord injury, you have no control of your bladder or bowel. So there's multiple levels of control. But who is the main coordinating person? Hypothalamus. Okay, let's quickly talk about drugs because there's a lot of drugs which are in this area, and the drugs which are acting on the sympathetic nervous system could be sympathomimetic drugs or sympatholytic drugs. What is a sympathomimetic drug? It fools the body, tells the body there is sympathetic activity. There may not be sympathetic activity, but the drug is it's going to mimic the sympathetic effects. So your body thinks that a fight or flight is happening. And these drugs are called the adrenergic drugs. For example, phenylephrine. That is a drug which is used in cold medicines. I mean, when you have cold, what do you have? A running nose, right? So what it does is that it constricts the blood vessels in the nose. So it reduces the congestion in the nose. Okay. I'll be posting this online. So you don't have to, you can take pictures here, there's no problem, but I'm going to post this online. So you're going to see all of this. And usually the recording will be available in about 3-4 hours. So immediately after that, I'll post it. So this is phenylephrine. And there are drugs which are sympatholytic. That means it blocks the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. They are called the anti-adrenergic drugs. And one famous one is the beta blocker. When do you use a beta blocker? Well, for a cardiac condition, more common condition. Angina, again, is uncommon. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, but what's a common cardiovascular problem? Hypertension. Beta blocker is the primary drug given in a hypertensive situation. Why? Because beta receptors causes vasoconstriction. Beta blocker blocks the action of beta receptors. That's why it's called a beta blocker. So the blood vessels relax. Blood pressure goes down. Which one? No, Viagra is not a beta blocker, but yes, it increases the blood flow. Yeah, that's true. But beta blocker usually metoprolol, propranolol. Propranolol is actually an alpha blocker, but beta blocker is propranolol. Metoprolol is a beta blocker. There are tons of drugs. There's a lot of beta blockers. Again, in the parasympathetic area, there are two. There are parasympathomimetic drugs, and they are called the cholinergic drugs. What they do is that they mimic the parasympathetic nervous system, which means they stimulate the acetylcholine receptors. Or there's another group of drugs which will inhibit the enzymes which breaks down acetylcholine. So when the enzyme is removed, acetylcholine will remain. It'll linger for a longer period of time. So it enhances the activity of acetylcholine. And that's the drug we use for glaucoma. What is glaucoma? Eye. It's an eye condition where the pressure in the eye increases. So parasympatholytic drugs blocks the parasympathetic effects, and that's why it's called the anticholinergic drugs. So atropine is a typical example. So atropine is given when your heart rate goes down. So this is usually, I'm a surgeon, so basically in an operating situation, sometimes you're operating, you open the abdomen or whatever, and the anesthetist is like, hey, stop. We have a problem here. what is it? It is the heart rate has gone down. So in that situation, they have to first get the heart rate back to normal. Something happened. Probably while I was doing it, I stimulated something. Something happened. So I stopped. Then the anesthetist will give a drug called atropine. Atropine is a parasympathetic. So it blocks the activity of the parasympathetic. So then the heart rate will come back to normal. And also, we give this atropine before surgery to reduce the secretions also, because sometimes the secretions can be overwhelming. And it will help if you give something to clear the secretions. Now, there are some drugs which acts on the neurotransmitters in the central nervous system. For example, there's a drug called serotonin. Serotonin is actually not a drug, sorry. It is a neurotransmitter in the brain. What does it do? It gives you a happy feeling. So if you have serotonin, that's good. So we have certain drugs which blocks the reuptake of serotonin, because we want serotonin to be there. So this drug can prevent the serotonin from being absorbed, or serotonin uptake. So that will prolong the mood elevation effect. So that's a mood elevator. Again, adenosine. What does adenosine cause? Sleepy. It makes you sleepy. Yep. So what do you do when you're feeling sleepy? Go to sleep? No, you can't go to sleep. You have a lot of work to do. What are you going to do? Drink some coffee. Exactly. Why? Because caffeine will compete with adenosine, and it will block the adenosine, because it will go to the receptors. It will jump into the receptors. It won't give adenosine a chance to act on the receptors. And there's another group of drugs called the monoamines. Like there are we said the serotonin is a neurotransmitter. There are other neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine. They are all monoamines. They all give the brain a feel-good sensation. And the amines are broken down by MAO, or monoamino oxidase. That's an enzyme in the brain. So you can give a drug which prevents the monoamine the MAO oxidase enzyme. Monoamino oxidase enzyme can be prevented from breaking down. So there'll be more monoamine available, and that's why MAOI, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, they act as an antidepressant. So a lot of these antipsychotic drugs, mood elevator drugs, they are all acting on the sympathetic parasympathetic system. There's a big field there where many people, they go into research in these fields. So drug development and drug companies benefit a lot from developing a new drug, and that's how they make money. If you look at advertisements, drug advertisements are huge, right? Because there's a big market. So most of the drugs are in what you studied today. All right. So I think that's the last slides. Okay. Wonderful. So let me tell you